for all the technical difficulties that are going on. It seems to be just the perfect storm of things not going quite right.
It's okay. We're back.
So continuing on with what we were talking about.
What'd you name him?
Sorry?
That's embarrassing. Captain Oliver Meow. So he's Oliver.
Maybe just ask people to mute if they're not.
Yeah, he's like my
Just
shadow.
reminding everyone who's on if you're not muted to please mute yourself.
Behind the keep bed. So I really, really.
All right, let's start with
Okay. So, Queen, you mentioned earlier that you ran the
Where your
Lives
cat come
Matter
from?
protest. Could you talk a little bit about what pushed you to start that and how that experience was as a whole?
I think you can mute single people, by the way. That might help. There we go. Can you repeat that question for me?
Yes. So you were saying earlier that you were in charge of the Guelph Black Lives Matter protest. I went to the protest. It was absolutely amazing, so empowering and so inspiring to hear all the voices from so many BIPOC members of that community. Could you talk a bit about what kickstarted you to want to do that and how the experience was as a whole?
Definitely. So originally when this first was planned, it was actually planned by two mothers who just wanted to do something for their, kids to show in support. And then I got tagged in along with it. They reached out to me because I was with Guelph Black Heritage, as well as I've worked for a lot of the last few years within the event planning in the city of Guelph. So I hopped on. I felt like it was a call that I was meant to answer, whether or not that came from my ancestors, whether it was universal, depending on what you guys believe in. I just truly believe that I was gifted the power of my voice and needed to use that to make that difference. That being said, that same night, my partner who lives in Toronto gave me a call, and we were just kind of talking about the opportunity. And he said, babe, I think you need to do it, because his mixed daughter, who's about my complexion, turned to him and said, hey, daddy, am I going to get shot by a police officer? And she's 8 years old. And that just really sank in for me about the reality of how I felt in that past story as a young 8-year-old being called the N-word and being pushed off. And here we are again, almost 30 years later. And that reminded me that I have to be that voice. There was no ifs, ands, or buts on the matter. It was definitely one of the hardest weeks I've ever been through in terms of planning an event. We had 6 days to put it together. We now got a new estimate of over 8,000 people that came out that day. And it wasn't easy. I know there are things that I could have fixed or done better, and I'm absolutely willing to learn and be a better human from that. But truthfully, it just felt like I was here at the right moment, at the right time. I was then surrounded by organizers who were also there at the right moment. To me, it seemed like divine entanglement at its finest. And it was beautiful to see that our community in Guelph, which is 90%, maybe 80, but 90% white people. It was nice to see the outpouring of love despite some of those messages of hate. I also believe that I don't have all the views, and I'm still learning as a Black woman. Each person of color, BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, have different experiences and have different ways they deal with that trauma. So I also respect the fact that there are some people who maybe felt we didn't do enough. It's a hard place and position to be in right now. That being said, I'm always willing to do better for my community. So it was just one step in the huge process that needs to be done to erase 400 plus years.
Mm-hmm. Well, amazing event. Thank you so much for putting that on. It was a really amazing event.
Thank you. It was a great time to protest. I think Guelph is a community that can show people we can be setting the standard, right? if we all kind of work together and have those uncomfortable conversations.
Yes. Kind of going on to the theme of uncomfortable conversations, as a question for both of you, how do you think that we can teach our parents or grandparents or peers who still make racist comments that it's not okay?
Denny, do you want to touch on that first?
Just trying to unmute. Yeah, I think it's a good question. What's important to know is that we have to start with ourselves. And I feel like a lot of people, including myself, I'm guilty as well, that we have a lot of judgment and a lot of bias. And until we start with what's going on inside of us and try to figure out what some of those are, and then trying to educate, you have to be open to find out like what are the facts and what is really happening, and then be open to, you know, respect everything that's going on and not basing things just on the difference of what people are, right? Just respecting that we are, you know, because of the color of our skin, or because we're female, or because we're, you know, we're different. It doesn't mean that, you know, we're any less of human, right? So we're the human race first, and then we go from there. It's unconscious biases. It's a very good place to start, because there's a lot of things that we don't know that's within ourselves that we're holding on to, and that we are we're living with, and we don't even realize. A lot of my friends don't even know that they're racist. They will say things to me like, you know, my best friend, who happens to be white, she has said to me many times, I don't see color. You know, same thing what you were saying, Queen, earlier, that, you know, it is offensive, because, you know, I don't think she gets, and I don't think a lot of people get it or don't understand. Because when you see me, the first thing you do see is color. So there's a lot of people walking around, including myself, that have, you know, have judgment, and we have things that we're holding, and we need to clear that up first. I think that's important to understand, that, you know, we need to be open, and we need to understand what is it that we're holding on. What are some of our convictions that we're holding on from ancestries or from our parents that we're bringing into raising our children today and the people that are around us. I think it starts with us, and that transparency and that openness. I think it starts there.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. You know, that's it's hard to educate our grandparents and our great grandparents.
Right.
As we know, in anything psychology based, like the unlearning is the hardest part, right?
Correct.
So I know for a lot of people of color, we want that rush aspect, but it can be really hard to get through to people. I'm always open to having that uncomfortable conversation, or maybe that question of like, I don't understand why all lives don't matter. And it's like, we have
Right.
to have those like unfortunate conversations. The reason why so many of us are like, there's no way we're talking about that, is because we're tired of talking about it. We've been here before. We were here, Trayvon Martin was 8 years ago. Philando Castile was 9 years ago. We've had these conversations, and now we're just tired of doing it. We're like, you need to start doing your own work, as you said, on yourself. And I think that this is what the COVID pandemic has really brought out, is it's allowed people to start healing from within, because they're home. They don't necessarily need to worry about the financials, not completely. There's a lot of groups that do. Right? Not classifying it, but I think it's actually like, although we're in such a strange time, it's a time that we can be radical and making movements. That being said, I actually don't think that the change is absolutely dire for our grandparents and great grandparents. It's the youth moving forward. It's the kids moving upward, right? As you working with kids all the time, as you can see, right? That one change can make the whole difference for how we move forward for maybe the next 400 plus years.
Yeah. And I also want to point out, I do have 5 children, 3 are males. and they're Black. So,
Absolutely.
right. And it is sad too, because I've had these conversations with my best friend, and we're like sisters. And it's so hard because, you know, she has two sons as well. And we've had this conversation going back and forth. And, you know, she said to me so many times that her sons go through the same thing that my Black boys go through. And it's like, you know, I have to say, no, no, I have to teach my sons to be different out in public. You know, I have to teach them that, you know, whenever they're pulled over or they're carded or anything that happens, they have to be, you know, very, very careful, even how they move their hands, how they look at, you know, a police officer, how they talk. Everything has to be like, you know, trained for them. And it's quite different, the way that I teach them, as opposed to my girlfriend who has two boys as well, and how they are, in society. There's a fear with my boys. Every time they go out, there's a fear. I'm scared that they're going to get targeted. I'm scared that they're, you know, something's going to happen to them. So it's quite different, really different.
Yeah. And I like 100%. It's like, you know, last Thursday, some of the ex Nighthawks players who played last season came over to catch up. One of them got a brand new BMW, beautiful, like very successful Black man. And he texted me that he was running late because he just got pulled over by a cop and had to prove that the car was his.
That's
And the
right.
only reason that conversation changed is because when they ran his license, they realized he was a pro ball player, and the whole conversation changed. That's not so easy. And he could even be a pro ball player and still end up being in a situation
Oh, of course.
that, you know, is just like, and this happens all the time. And I fear for people who have kids, like, you know, now that I even know that you have these 5 children, that's going to always be in the back of our heads, right? When, you know, one thing my mom never understood is why I was grieving so hard every time we lost a new Black community member if I didn't personally know them.
Yeah.
But what it feels like is we've all been family for 400 plus years going through this. Generational pain sits in our DNA. So
Yes.
when these things happen, it's like my personal, it's like a hit on my heart. Every time there's like a chip on my heart that's been slowly breaking off.
Right.
And then we aren't given the opportunities to get help for what we need, or worse, a next incident happens before we even have the time to grieve.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
yeah, very difficult.
Yes. Do you think that youth in not only our communities, but as a provincial level or a federal level, that we are educated enough in Black history?
No.
No.
Absolutely
That's
not.
one answer. No.
No, you know, and I think that what goes to say is that they have separated out our history into one singular month. That makes just no sense. And I didn't see that representation growing up in school. I didn't see it in our Guelph Civic Museum, which is insane because we actually hold such history of the Underground Railroad. And previous to that, like, we've only learned about like slavery, how we've been in chains, aka handcuffs, and blank, 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 right? They don't necessarily, we might see Black history, but we only see a negative 20% of our 80% beautiful history.
Yes, yes. Very true. It would be nice for us to be uplifted and to see all the wonderful things that Black people have really contributed to the community and all the things that we've done. So definitely that needs to be there as well, that presence of greatness and all the beautiful things that we've done here and all over.
Yeah, and the beautiful things we've done together as allies.
Yeah.
There are a lot of, I think, BIPOC community members out there who are truly at their wits' end with anybody of a Caucasian race. And I understand that trauma and pain. But I also believe, for me personally, that there is a unity that also needs to happen as the government tries to continuously divide us in any scope. There is some unity, but being an ally isn't just being not racist, it's being anti-racist. It
Yes.
means that you're not going to stand behind me, but you're going to stand in front of me when that cop comes. It means that you're
Right.
going to stand up for me in the face of racism.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. We're
Yeah.
together, right? Yeah. That's where we're going to be stronger.
How do you guys think that white people, we can use our privilege to support the movement that is going on right now? As there are protests going on, petitions being handed out, how can we use our privilege to support them?
I think first would be to be more aware and conscious of where you're buying stuff. You know, a lot of times, even for myself, again, I'm guilty of it. We just go and we buy things. And now the way that I can make a difference and a change is now I'm very aware of where I'm putting my dollars, right? So just knowing that, okay, I'm going to try and support Black people who are in business. I'm going to try and support, you know, Black people who are trying to do something, and I'm going to try to be there and support them any way I know how. But I think, you know, just the whole buying stuff, that's power in itself, and supporting and uplifting Black people. I think there needs to be some, you know, some accountability to that. So I'm going to be able to do that. So I'm pushing forward to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's, you know, it's a hard question. I'm going to tell you right now, no matter what you do, there's going to be a person of color who's really against it. We're so beyond hurt that no matter what you do, you have to be prepared that white savior mentality is a huge concept right now, in the fact that you want to feel better. And for us, you feeling better doesn't actually change. Action always speaks louder than words. Social media posts are great because we're in a world and a time with this pandemic that's a lot of the way we communicate. Like you said, contacting your MP, your MPP, even more importantly, your ward counselor. They don't get enough attention, right? Your ward counselor really, our MPPs and our MP and our mayor are bombarded with constant emails. I can say that, like, I have people emailing me just asking me, like, where can I shop for a plant from a BIPOC member? And I'm like, I have 300 plus emails, right? So I think that they get really bombarded. So your ward counselor really makes much more of a difference, especially if you're living in a very predominantly white ward.
White, yeah.
I'm in Ward 4 here in Guelph, so we actually are predominantly of color. There's a lot of color out on this end of town, from our Ethiopian, Eritrean, our refugees, our Syrians, right? There's a lot of ethnicity in that grouping, but that doesn't speak for a lot of the other areas in our city. And I think that also goes to show that not all the time we want to be in those areas because safety, what that neighbor might think of us. I think there's, you know, petitions are great as well. But more importantly, at the end of the day, is those uncomfortable conversations with your fellow family member and friends who are also white. It might not necessarily be your place all the time to have that answer. Let me also be clear about that. It might not be your place, but it is your place to stand up for somebody who might be your best friend. And they're like, yeah, but Blue Lives Matter too. And you should be like, Karen, let me check you for one moment and tell you why. And if I don't have that answer, let me recommend you 6 or 7 different profiles that you can follow and be engaged in that have education. And also, never expect us to give out our education for free. If you start seeing people of color being like, you better send me $20 to have that discussion, they might not be wrong to ask that, right? Like, this has been a lot of us being re-educating tools we already know for free. And that's like just as the same situation we've been in. How am I going to confirm that this time next year we're not having this same conversation? Right?
And is it our responsibility too?
That too, right?
It could become exhausting.
Yeah.
Yeah, so even for myself, I've had to pull back because I don't feel that it's my responsibility to educate all the white people. It's really not.
And
I
even
remember
your,
seeing,
go on.
sorry.
Educating it within your workplace is really important right now too.
Mhm.
You might not see it on a forefront, but a lot of the time the CEO and board members of your company might be not appropriate for the stance and position, just like we were talking about where you're spending your dollars. Walmart is a great example. We just saw the release of
Saw that.
Walmart and the All Lives Matter shirts, followed by Black Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter. It might not seem that big of a deal, but in the essence of things, they're like, well, it's a third-party reseller. I'm sorry. Does that not mean that you approved that? So we have to take responsibility to
Mm-hmm.
fight against those, and we have to take responsibility and action, even as BIPOC, but as white women within your I shouldn't say women, whatever identifying you are in that space, talking to your work. Do you have anti-racism programs and initiative? Do you have oppression, systematic oppression? Do you have training coming up? Where is writing to your provincial members of parliament are really important, because this defunding of the police, although I'm very much behind it, it does not happen on a city level. I cannot ask Mayor Cam to defund our police. I have to go straight to politics in the provincial level. And I think using the tools that you're given so graciously back to us, whether that's your time, whether that's like a position that you're like, you know what, my girl just interviewed for that. I don't even understand how she didn't get it and I did, right? Just as small things really count for making change.
I remember seeing a post someone had sent me on Instagram where it was someone talking about how people who are white and are using their privilege to go to protests and sign petitions and support the Black Lives Matter movement, we should not be being thanked because we are not doing something for you. We are trying to rewire the way that we used to think and support the Black people of color people so that they can do what they are supposed to, not supposed to be doing, but what they are.
Yeah, I get you.
Just supporting them. Yeah.
Yeah. And I, like that white savior mentality
Yeah.
comes up a lot. I think I recently put up a post that like, I said, dear white people, like, do not expect an applause for me for you doing the right thing.
Yes.
Okay.
Right? Like if you're standing up for injustice and you're standing up to racism, you should have been this whole time. I shouldn't be having to say, thank you for doing that for me. Yeah, we're so done with that position of being like, well, thank you for getting me this opportunity. Well, no, I was well qualified, right? So I think that happens a lot. People, this is just how it works, right? You do something nice, people are like,
Applause.
you. That's just how the world works. But in this scenario, it is not the time for applause.
Yeah. And so I am wondering, what is your kind of perspective or opinion on people who are using this time for performative activism?
It's a tough position. I think we see performative anything in our world that we're in, without two thoughts about how that affects another person. We see it in trending in TikTok constantly with the performance level of attention and likes versus what's right. For me, performative opportunity for you to gain more followers or more money is just being a part of the racism problem. You're just using it as a money grab opportunity, which we're used to.
We have a question in from the comments from D. Valentine. She's asking if you guys could speak to diversity and inclusion versus anti-racism programs in corporate culture.
Do you want to speak to that, Denny, or?
Well, I'll speak to the diversity. I feel that when it comes to diversity and inclusion, I feel like, there's that equality and then equity, versus, so I think for especially being Black and female, I think there were things that were not readily available for me being Black and female. But I think when you have a organization or a job in a workplace, I find that a lot of the times they're just catering to the people that are there and not realizing that there's other people and there's other ethnicities and other needs, especially being a mom to 5 children. Growing up and being in the workforce, it was quite different. And I realized very quickly that my colleagues didn't have the same challenges that I did. So, I mean, there's more than one issue there. There's the, I don't know, it's tough. It's really tough because, I mean, for me, being a young mom and for me being, in that position, I needed things that other people didn't need. And I think that I didn't get my needs met in the workplace. I don't know. I don't know. You can speak to.
I think what needs to happen is diversity, inclusion, and anti-racism need to be all together in one. We, of course, are not the only minority misrepresented within the workplace. You see our fellow like Asian culture, our fellow, it could go on and on. LGBTQ2+, like different people experience different things. That being said, it's not necessarily that we need more training, we need better training. You see this in the police force, right? A lot of people are saying, oh, well, the cops need to be trained better. They need to be blah, 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 blah. They just need better versions of the training. Necessarily more training doesn't help the situation, but how you're being trained and what that information is. Corporate culture is a really tough position. I think corporate culture has been built on cis white men who represent a straight male. I think corporate culture is beneficial to the straight white male also, as white women who are in this group or as anyone who represents in a different bracket. You also see this, right? The difference between, what a female gets paid versus a male job. Like all of these issues are so built on the fact that we want to benefit the white male. And I think that needs to change. And the change also has to happen where the source of training, diversity, inclusion, and anti-racism are coming from. If you look at your corporations or maybe that's someone that you're looking for, a lot of this time it's being trained by someone who's not of color. It's come from someone who is not of color. It's been a program designed by the government. And as we know, has been oppressive to people of color from any ethnicity, primarily Black, Indigenous, and Hispanic at the top. So I think, you're very right, because at the end of the day, our corporate culture has to have a shift. And I think that's why we see more inclusion and openness in Guelph, because we have so much run off of small business that it gives us a different outlook. This is also why you see, like, I think it's like, I don't even know the proper stats, so don't quote me, but it's something ridiculous, like 25% or 50% of business owners are women. But out of that, like 40% of them are like Black women. And we've always had to create our own space because the opportunity wasn't there for us. So we had to always figure out a different source because of those issues that happen in the corporate culture.
Right. Right.
Mm-hmm.
That was a great question. Thank you for asking.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you guys want to add on to that? Are there any other questions that anybody that's viewing has? If so, please put them in the chat box. But I guess for now, how can youth get involved in the Black Lives Matter movement?
Yeah, you have a couple options. If If you are in like the Guelph Center, Wellington area, there is a Black Lives Matter Kitchener. There's also a Black Lives Matter Guelph chapter that has recently been started. That is not part of Guelph Black Heritage Society. That doesn't mean we won't work closely together, but we are two different organizations, just in terms of a nonprofit. You can also, we welcome people at Guelph Black Heritage Society for any volunteers. I think we have some youth right now in Guelph working on a program that will allow training for others to create Black unions within their high schools, which GCVI is the first and ever to have this happening, which I'm really proud of GC for doing that. Yeah. And honestly, our youth really need to take a stance on where their social media lies. And that means in music and in dance and artistry, we're seeing a ton of that within the social media scope, but no credit to the Black culture of which they've taken it from. Mm-hmm. So I think pay where credit's due, even as close as dance, right? Hip hop's huge now. And we need to start honoring some of those things in addition. Even Indigenous, there's a lot of things that come from Indigenous background too.
So just looking at the comments, we only have 7 minutes left, but Carrie asked if you could talk just a little bit, Queen, about working with the UGDSB. And
yeah, so Upper Grand District School Board right now, last night they just had a meeting regarding police safety in schools. As we're seeing, this is something that we're really looking at taking a toll of removing policing. I'm sure Denny can speak to that in terms of youth and how they feel engaged or not engaged. I think we need to take a look at reworking the system and changing that maybe to social workers, right? These are things that need to happen. So we are working with Upper Grand District School Board. They are creating a new committee that will include trustees and 7 community members from different walks of life, LGBTQ2+, a Black community member, Indigenous, someone who's Asian, maybe Indian. That's huge out here. I would love to see stats on how many Indian business owners we have in this city. So that's definitely a question happening. And then I will answer the quick other question that was directed at me is you can absolutely volunteer for associations. Just because an organization is Black Lives Matter or Guelph Black Heritage, it does not mean that you can't volunteer. We openly welcome safe allies. There is a vetting process for most of these organizations now because we've had people who try to infiltrate in past for hateful purposes, but absolutely volunteer. And it can be like 1 hour a year. Volunteerism doesn't have a quota.
Awesome. The last question that we have enough time for, I think, is from D. Ballantyne. Is it okay for a white person to run an anti-racism workshop to help educate about privilege, vocabulary, equity versus equality, etc., and the intent to take the weight off BIPOC from educating all the white people?
That's a good question. I would say yes and no. I think that there is a time and a place for certain anti-racism workshops, whatever that does look like, to help educate your fellow white allies. That being said, if you're trying to tell the stories and words of another person of color, that might not be your place. I really open up the opportunity to invite a person of color, Indigenous community member to come out and speak also, whether that's giving honor to the lands, whether that's just speaking on their experiences. I think sometimes this battle for anti-racism needs to include us, so you might really understand our experience and point of view. But Jenny, perhaps you can give an additional answer to that. Maybe.
Hi. I would say I agree with you, Queen. There's nothing wrong with a white person or somebody else to run groups, especially if you're trying to run a group where youth are leading it. then I think just facilitating it and then let youth lead the groups, then I think it's fine. As far as if that person is going to run the whole entire group and they are the ones that are, leading it, I think it is better to have somebody that represents the person or a Black person or whatever theme that they're going to be presenting. So I do agree with that. It's worked better when it's someone that they can identify with.
Well, I think we only have 3 minutes left, so I think this is a good time to wrap up. Are there any final comments or words you'd like, either of you would like to say?
Well, I want to say thank you to everyone here that has shown interest and wants to learn more, because I do believe that it starts with you. And when you put more openness and the willingness to know what some of your unconscious biases are, and then you're able to, you move different, you walk different, everything becomes so different in the ways and the lenses that you look through. So I think that is, I just want to thank everyone that's here, and thank you for your interest.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Just, I appreciate you guys listening. I think at the end of the day, that's what is all that we need. We just wanted to be heard without the argument back. Mm-hmm. That being said, I'm not ever victim blaming everybody for the situation. There's definitely work that needs to be done on my end too. We can always grow as humans and be better in any walk of life, but it is time that, we raise up our BIPOC community. It is enough is enough. The change has to start now, or it's going to be too late before this next conversation you call to book me, and I'm not here to do it. And I think that that's really something to be said, right? This could be the last time you ever hear me speak, because tomorrow I could walk out the door and someone just doesn't like the way I walk, doesn't like the way I'm pulling out my cell phone, called the cops on me for no reason because they were scared or see me as a threat. I think it's important so that you know that tomorrow me and Denny and all her children have a voice.
We have less than a minute left, so I really want to say thank you so much for both of you for coming out. Your perspective and voices for everything in the BIPOC community is appreciated more than words can express and is valued. So thank you for coming out and talking. This has been an amazing conversation.
Thank you so much, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, Dalen, for this beautiful host too.
And Dalen. Yep. Thank you, guys.
Well,
thank you, Queen. Nice to meet
you.
Guys.
Nice to meet you, sis.
Yes.
Hope everybody has a lovely rest of their day and a lovely rest of their week.
Wendy,
enjoy the night together. Sorry?
Do you mind just connecting me and Denny as well? Thank you. Thank you. Sorry.